Good morning. My name is Shannon B. Douglas. I'm a writer for Woke Watch Canada, and up until the end of June this year, at least since the beginning of the year, I was writing a weekly column for Woke Watch Canada called the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. And at the end of June, after 21 volumes, tracking the news about gender ideology and gender identity politics in Canada and the snowballing amount of information that we're getting on the subject, I decided to take a little break for the summer and got some time off to reflect on a bunch of things, including what to do with the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. Now, today, as you can tell, we're trying out a video format, and I'm here with Melanie Bennett of Our Duty Canada. I met Melanie in June when she visited Ottawa for the march, along with Josh Alexander and Billboard Chris. Melanie's been active in this for a while, and today we're going to talk about some of the stuff that's happened this week. And there's been some really big, momentous news in Canada in the last week. But before I get into that, Melanie, what did you do this summer?
What did I do this summer? God, what did I not do this summer?
Tell us a bit about yourself too. How do you come to this thing, and why are we talking?
The best way to describe it is that my family was impacted by gender issues, and for about a year I didn't really talk about it, didn't know who to talk about it with. I did try to find some information online, and I was somewhat successful with that. I realized Twitter's the place to be to get this information. When I joined that, I sort of found different players, including yourself, in Canada that were pushing back against it. And as you said, I joined the protests on June 9th in Ottawa, where I just introduced myself to a bunch of people who look friendly. And here I am. And since then, I've joined Our Duty Canada, which is a support network for parents of children who are experiencing gender ideation. So as a group, just for anyone who's interested, they uphold the reality of biology and common sense principles. And that's done in order to put pressure on the social, political, and cultural forces that are currently promoting trans ideology across Canada for youth. So I did that. Then I didn't know how I wanted to participate with Our Duty Canada, but I knew that I didn't fear being public. I did not fear having my face out there. And I knew that most of the parents in our group, pretty much all the parents in our group, couldn't do that. Either their children were at home or they had jobs in which they were put at risk in one way or another. And I had no problem being public. That wouldn't affect me. So I decided to make some videos. I decided to do a podcast. We have a podcast called The Resilience on Our Duty's YouTube site. And I also made a few short documentaries, explainers of things that are going on in our local school boards and across Canada. So, for example, I did a long video, sort of exploratory video on the comprehensive sexuality education guidelines from the UN and how that affects Canada. So that's what I've been working on. I never did any video editing or podcasting in any way, shape, or form before any of this. So I'm still getting used to the whole thing. But that's in a nutshell what I've been doing. What else I've been doing this summer? We also have a weekly Twitter space. I'm trying to grow that too as a place where people can come speak openly about the things that they're experiencing in the gender wars, I guess, in Canada. So that's that. And that's every Tuesday at 7. So I'm Fingal Dusty on Twitter. So if anyone's interested, they can join our spaces and come speak freely. So that's what I've been up to this summer. What have you been up to?
Well, I took some well-earned time off. Twitter, I have a Twitter problem. It's very addictive when you get into it. And that's part of the social media conundrum that we have. In order to communicate effectively with other people who have concerns like we do, we need to kind of be in some of those spaces, but they start to dominate your life. And so I took some time off. I think we got about 4 weeks off this summer traveling. And not that I wasn't occasionally checking in or working or reading on the issue, but got to dip my toes in the ocean. We drove the Cabot Trail in the Jeep with the doors off on a beautiful sunny day in Nova Scotia. And along the way, I had some conversations with people in New Brunswick. I met with an advisor to Blaine Higgs' cabinet. Blaine Higgs is the premier, and they've done some changes on to their school policies about self-identification, which has both got a lot of pushback and a ton of support.
Yeah.
And just back in the last 10 days or so, ramping up to we all have real jobs, right? Ramping up towards work in the fall and some projects in my professional life, and also looking towards what's going to happen in September. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I think that was the biggest story of the summer, was the call for the Million for Children March, and it seems to have captured imagination across the country, and all kinds of people are asking, what can we do and how can we get organized? And I think we can circle back to that a little bit, as a big picture piece. I've always with this. With the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report, I've tried to be a little bit irreverent. I've tried to make fun of people a little bit. I tried to poke a little at some of the characters, and in writing format, I think that's easier for me to be funny. And I don't know if I'm funny, but we have a ridiculous character we're going to get to. Big red hair with a knife on his shirt. That was late breaking last night news in Ottawa.
Yeah.
But here,
It's gonna come and shank you.
there's what I think. Yeah, I think there's like three pieces this week that were really standout, and we've talked about this briefly. The first one was that there was a public announcement from the Premier of Manitoba,
Yeah.
about changing the social transition rules, the change of name and pronouns, and self-identification of kids at school without parent involvement. And she hasn't specifically made a policy change, but she has made an announcement that is likely going to be a platform piece for the provincial election in Manitoba coming up in October. And then the next day, we had Premier Moe from Saskatchewan, who actually said, we're putting a halt to this. I wrote about the leaked, the Planned Parenthood leaked news that came from the school in Saskatchewan before I went on hiatus. And that triggered a whole bunch of investigation in Saskatchewan. Do you know a bit about that story?
A little bit. I've sort of been reading a little bit more into it. And speaking of Faye Johnstone, obviously had to comment on the issues. And I want to read a little bit of what I read and comment myself. So one of the things I noticed looking at some of the articles that were published is they either did not include discussion on the Planned Parenthood cards that really started this whole issue, the pornographic cards, which catalyzed these decisions to have been made, or they did so in a very tiny amount at the bottom. And this is what my own 2-hour video about the comprehensive sexuality education guidelines was about. Really at the crux of it is this Planned Parenthood and other consultants in the sexual health field. Now, to be clear, these were very, 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 very kink orientated and porn cards, not suitable at all for ninth graders or any other age. And not only that, those cards were also released at other schools in Western Canada multiple times. And so this is not a first time occurrence. And let me just say here, one of the things that, yeah, please.
Just before you jump, like I wouldn't have those cards in my nightstand. Like
No.
right, they make me blush. Really, really inappropriate for kids, and
Yep.
we won't get into details, but.
So Johnstone said in one of the articles, they, as in gender criticals or the politicians putting a halt on this, are playing politics with the safety, dignity, and inclusion of vulnerable trans students. Johnstone pointed out that representation of the 2S LGBTQIA plus youth in the homeless population, they're overrepresented in the homeless population, which is estimated to be 25 to 40%, as evidence of the violence that queer youth face in unsafe situations. Now, this gets brought up a lot in terms of these policies are making children unsafe. And I just wanted to point out that we have an affirmative model in this country. And that means that you do not explore other reasons why children may feel unsafe with their sex. And when you're doing that and you're simply saying, not allowing them to be trans is making them vulnerable, making them homeless. What you're not actually doing is, are there other reasons why they're becoming homeless? And are these vulnerable children being targeted for becoming queer and for becoming trans because they're vulnerable? And so there's no discussion around this whatsoever. And certainly the media are not covering other points of view on this matter. And there certainly could be argued that these vulnerable kids are being targeted to begin with, right? And so there's already this assumption that, okay, so listen, the policy here is children under 16. These are children, okay? So a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, these are children. And we know that a change in pronoun is not a benign process. It's part of a medicalization process, okay?
Yeah. I've been describing it as bluntly as part of these sex change protocols.
Yeah.
And those protocols were developed in Canada at the Canadian Association of Mental Health, where Ken Zucker and Ray Blanchard and others worked and did research on the issue of gender dysphoria, what they called at the time transvestic fetishism. They researched all of this stuff and they recognized patterns in it. And in the olden days, like not that long ago, a couple of decades ago, the view was that the medical interventions were so extreme that they were a last resort, and that talk therapy, exploration of trauma, exploration of sexual abuse, exploration of other identity issues, and then if the ideation persisted, and very often it did not with therapy, that the clinicians would recommend a person for a period of a year or two live life as the other gender, change their names, change their pronouns, change their dress, and attempt to live in the world as the other sex as part of the exploratory process. Hilary Cass said this is not a benign intervention. It's actually a profound psychological intervention that is not neutral. And we've, now school teachers who are unqualified to do this are doing this in secret from parents without any psychological evaluations at all.
Yeah, so that's a really important point, that there's an assumption of potential future harm. Okay, so they're not saying parents have been abusive towards their children. What they say is parents may be abusive towards their children by rejecting their children. There's a potential future harm there. One, you're predicting that something bad may happen, right? And two, if that something bad happens, the school sees themselves, the teachers in the school see themselves as the glitter family, right? Like they're the ones who are going to be the family. They're the ones who are going to be the safe space. Now, nothing about any of that is ethical to me. So I've spoken to many teachers as part of my podcast and also as a parent, as part of Our Duty Canada. And one of the things I've realized is that in every single situation, if there is any suspicion of abuse, the protocol in every single case is to involve children's services. That's the protocol.
And police, yeah.
And police. Yep. And in this case, even if you suspect there could be harm, also the protocol. And it's not all about taking children into care. There are many different types of interventions. But if you look online, if you bring this up to some of these trans activists, they're avidly against this. It's really all about keeping secrets. And that does raise a lot of very interesting questions. And I'm really hoping that these kinds of this kind of pushback from queer activists activates the normie population into saying, this is a bit odd.
What the hell?
Why do you need to keep secrets from parents because of children, right? They're treating this queer issue, this trans issue, as somehow completely different from everything else. Yep. And I don't understand how you can make that justification. Why is this one thing different from every other situation?
It goes against, like, I got involved in the Twitter discussion with people in Saskatchewan. So there was statements from the teachers union, the Association of School Boards in Saskatchewan condemning this, demanding that they put a halt on it. There's a doctor who's very vocal about this and all the language we're talking about, right? And the presumption
and it's
of
all about the abuse of parents. Yeah. It's protecting children from their parents.
The presumption of harm or the presumption of guilt
yes.
by a state actor is
Yes.
something that we remediated in law 900 years ago in the
Well, there
Magna
was also
Carta.
a movie made about that called Minority Report, right?
Right.
A
Yeah. Like you
science
can't
fiction
predict what's
film.
going to happen. You can't assume that people are guilty. It goes against every principle in the foundations of common law
But
that the state.
even if they did, even if they did have that and they didn't want to call children's services, there's no reason they cannot mediate to have a better relationship between the children and their families rather than keep secrets and keep them away. That's what abusers do. That is the stages of grooming.
Yep.
When you separate,
100%
you isolate the
separate.
child from their closest family members, friends,
That's right.
all of that. That is a
So no
grooming
one can
tactic.
protect them.
No,
Yep.
that
Yep.
is absolutely a grooming tactic. And when you call these people groomers, they go ape about it, saying
Yep.
it's not like that. It's not like that. We're protecting children. But let's be honest, that is a grooming tactic. So is desensitization. Okay,
Yep.
desensitization is also another very, very large, important part of the grooming tactic, where you present sexualized information to young children a little bit at a time over a long period of time, so they become desensitized. Perfectly normal, right?
Yep.
Add that to the keeping secrets on top of it. Add that to the normalization of this behavior. All of this together. This is why people call these activists groomers.
Yeah. Let me circle back to the beginning of this because you pointed to their claim that 25 to 40% of kids of people who are homeless are trans or queer,
25
and
to
that
40%. That was Faye Johnstone's.
it's a ludicrous claim, by the way, but it's not an uncommon claim.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens is that these groomers, whether they're part of the online glitter family, people like I hate even saying his name, Jeffrey Marsh, the TikTok predator,
Top groomer.
who's yeah, he's the top groomer, right? He says, you need to go if they don't agree with your you being queer, if they object to anything you're doing, if they don't like your change of name, if they, then you can then that I'll be your family. And that's like the old trope of, come and run away and join the circus. Your parents are horrible, we're your family now.
Yeah.
It's a way of separating children from parents, and you and I both speak passionately about this because we both experienced it.
Yes.
And the destruction that this is causing in families and the long-term harms of separating vulnerable kids from families who love them
Yes.
is just from a social, economic, and capacity to have fulfillment in one's life is just utterly destructive. I
Yeah.
can't square the circle here that the presumption of guilt and the claims of potential harms outweigh the actual harms that are coming to these kids. We don't
Yes.
want kids to be homeless.
Yeah, I think there was a boogeyman invented. Well, look, this boogeyman this boogeyman does exist in the past, where there was a lot of actual homophobia, right?
Yep.
Actual, real homophobia,
Yep.
and families would actually potentially physically harm or kick out their children or cut them off entirely for simply
Yeah.
being
I
homosexual.
remember
That
that when I was
existed.
in high school. Yeah.
That existed,
Yep.
right? I don't think that that's a significant problem at all. I'm sure it still exists in one way or another, but I don't see it as a major problem. But that boogeyman remains, and it was revived specifically for the trans and queer activism to say that these horrible individuals are on the rise. They're kicking out their children. They're being violent. They throw out all these false statistics, false information,
Yep.
disproved studies about suicide and all these things,
Tell
completely
the lie over
disregarding
and
what
over
parents
and over again.
disregarding what parents like you and I are talking about. And I interview lots of parents. So that's what my podcast basically for the majority is interviewing these parents anonymously about their stories because they're remarkably similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these things are completely discredited for this boogeyman that I have yet to encounter. Now, I can say that I speak to parents who are clearly very loving. If they were not loving, they would not be in an organization to try to help their children. They would not be speaking to other people in the same position. They would not be working hard to protect their children from what they see as mental harms being caused by others. They wouldn't care because they don't care. They're unloving, they're abusive. But that's not what I'm seeing,
Yeah.
right? And yet that's what you hear all the time is that all of these people just don't care. They're homophobic. They don't love their children. They're abusive. Not what I'm
Yep.
seeing. Anyway, that's my
So,
that's my view
so
on
I
that.
mean, it's been it's good to unpack this because we're going to put this up online and people can get a sense of what's behind what some of these false claims, and there's massive progress happening. Right. When I started the Canadian Gender Wars Report in January, is because we were getting a couple articles a week in significant publications like the National Post. They changed their editorial position 12 months ago in August of 2022 about the trans issue. And then, we started getting, occasional once a week kind of articles. We're getting them almost every day.
Yeah.
In some form or another, and we've got
Well, I
other
think people
really
are starting to unpick, or starting to realize that this is not so. The T and the T and the Q, well, part of the T, half of the T. Transsexual and transgender, first of all, are very different. So we're not going to talk about transsexual. We're going to talk about transgender and queer. They are entirely different things from the LGP. They do not belong in
yep,
any way, shape, or form as part of a big whole. They are not a community. They're nothing to do with sexual orientation whatsoever. It is a philosophical mindset that comes from uh, frankly
academics.
messed up ideas in academics about
Yep,
deconstructing society and undoing everything that is normativity, right? So this
yep.
is completely nothing to do with being lesbian, being gay, being bisexual whatsoever. Transsexual is actually having gender dysphoria, also nothing to do with this thing. And I think people are starting to realize that this mindset, this philosophical framework, way to see the world, yeah, which is very culty, is the
Yep.
problem. And I think some people cannot articulate that. They know it, but they cannot exactly explain why. And I think it's useful to be able to verbalize that, because they are very, very different.
I think that's a good segue into the next piece, because I mentioned the Million for Children March early in
Yeah.
our conversation. And what we, like you and I and some others, in our close network were part of the early conversations with Camille Al-Sheikh about the Million for Children March. We actually, if you recall, you and I and the I don't know if I can say her name, the founder of Our Duty in Canada, pushed. Yeah, we pushed Camille. We pushed Camille to set the date of September 20th. And there was an action in the U.S. on planned for September 14th. Keep your kids home. Very similar to the Million for Children. There was an action planned on the 22nd. Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, and Josh Alexander in Toronto. We proposed those dates to create solidarity around. He didn't want to do that at all. He wanted an independent date so he could name it special and have it his own. So September 20th was the date we all agreed on. And then we released that to our networks, and it caught fire, right? It caught the imagination of people all across Canada. People are asking us, what can we do, and when can we do it?
Yeah, people really want it.
How yeah, and there's organizations coming together now to pick up on what you were saying. What we're seeing about, like, people don't have the words to articulate this. What we're seeing, like, we talked to one group leader this week, 35,000 strong network, active people across the country. They're part of the freedom movement. And the freedom movement is kind of activated on this issue across the country, and that's a populist grassroots. It's a felt sense, and not
Yeah.
everybody in that movement, and probably pretty few, can articulate the problems of queer
It's because
theory
people
and have
realize
studied.
what they're seeing in their own families, what they're seeing in their own communities is so different from the lies being told by the media in this case, right? So those are what people are seeing, and what's being reported is just so disjointed that people do realize that this is not
Yeah,
right. And
yeah,
it's so obvious because children are involved.
yeah.
Mm.
I can't remember the article off the top of my head, but once again, CBC put up a piece this week that was just so, like, it was just steeped in queer theory. It involved a young person. I'm sorry, I'll put it up on my Twitter when I
Yeah.
can find it.
Yeah, I
But
can't think of what it might be.
I mean, some of the drag queen stuff and the approach that the legacy media is taking on this is just, it's completely captured. It's not
It
based in
makes it
reality.
so obvious what they're doing in this case. And as people realize it, whether it's the stuff, the homework that children are bringing home, or a lot of people through the pandemic listened into the
Yeah,
lessons of their children, or the children are coming in and telling them all this crazy stuff, right? And for a lot of people, they realize this is not right. And then when you hear these messages and these lies that are being told, it becomes so obvious that it's just it's just so obvious that our media is captured and paid for and bought. It,
Yeah.
there's no other way to explain this. I mean, on this particular issue, that's what really took the veil off for me. Like, I have absolutely no trust in them whatsoever because the blatant lies. Like, they're not even clever at this point.
Yeah. So let me share with you some of the other big stuff that's happened related to the Million for Children March.
Yeah.
So I'm networked across the country, and I had an exchange online with a friend of mine that I met 18 months ago or so. He's very well known in conservative circles, and he mentioned, because I floated the statement of principles we've been working on for a national coalition in that forum, and he gave feedback, and he said, I was talking with Pierre Poilievre on Sunday night, and he asked me about the Million for Children March. This was a private event, and this particular person, everybody knows him, and my friend said to Mr. Poilievre, you should learn about this and you should support it.
Yeah.
And
he,
I talked
he was
to,
asked about it on a TikTok video recently too.
Right,
So
right. So he did, like, just, it was
it.
48 hours later, he was asked a question, and he gave a response on it, which is extremely positive. Now, Wednesday morning, I briefed a member of Parliament conservative who has spent his summer building the file on this. I don't know what the right title to call. He's got the file.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talked to at least a half a dozen people that I know about this. I won't tell you who the MP is, but he was gathering information, listening to parents. I have a research project I'm working on with some international medical and psychotherapeutic professionals who are very well known. And we briefed him on the work that we're doing. And then I spoke to a journalist yesterday, kind of on background, who was a staffer on the Hill for a few years. And his conservative friends who are MPs, he's spoken with them over the summer, as it's kind of the routine in politics, right? The MPs go home and they go to the barbecues and they meet with their constituents, and they get the earful from their constituents. So this is on the minds of politicians. And we know that coming up in the second weekend of September, the National Conservative Conference is happening in Quebec City. There's at least 8 or 10 proposals for debate from EDAs, that's electoral district associations, from conservatives on the issue of gender, education, parental rights, affirmation model. Pretty much everything that you can think of is going to be debated by the conservatives in September.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say that I don't trust any leaders, although it's a very positive step that a leader is not just blatantly calling anyone who is asking questions or parents homophobic, white supremacist, bigots, whatever, any name that you can call. So, I mean, there's progress in that. But wasn't Poilievre someone who supported the Bill C4?
It's true. So in the first round was Bill C6.
Yes.
That was the original iteration before Trudeau called the election. It died because the election was called. The writ dropped, and that sort of cancels all bills in process. And the Conservatives had opposed C6 prior to the election. Now, having talked to some strategists and some political insiders in the Conservative Party, some of them fairly high up, the choice was to not... Okay, like right now, the election is Poilievre's to lose, right? He doesn't want to give any ammunition, to give a wedge to Trudeau, who's trying, like Trudeau's throwing mud at the wall every day to try and see what will stick. And we're getting an awful lot of, like Trudeau brings up that Poilievre wants to, and cancel abortion laws, which is a complete fabrication. But it's a projection,
yeah, but
and
they're
it's
both
emotional.
flinging mud at each other. I mean, I just stopped paying any attention, and then the public's
True.
like, "Oh, he's wearing sunglasses and he's wearing a T-shirt. Who did it better?" Couldn't care less, guys. Couldn't care less.
Well, let's say, so I got a rumor from Saskatchewan that the NDP provincial is backing away from the issue.
What?
Because it's unconfirmed. I saw someone,
buddy.
Right? But the ratios on the topic online are not favorable to the topic. And we know that I'm going to go to the UK now, because over the summer, Keir Starmer was asked, and Keir Starmer, I believe, is the head of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And they've been pushing gender self-ID and all this gender stuff for years. Keir
Yeah.
Starmer, they made an internal decision because the research is coming out. They know this is a losing fight. They know, like, if the NDP hangs on to this for too long, it will destroy them completely.
Yeah, well, call me cynical, but I feel like this is a chosen, this is their flagship woke issue. And I just cannot imagine that the neo Marxists in this country, Labour and NDP, who have gone wholly into critical conscious dogma, would suddenly backtrack simply for votes. I find that very difficult to believe. That's possible because, look, politicians need to get voted in, and it is a very unpopular issue. Hey, guys, you brought kids into this. Your fault. But I would be very surprised. I will watch this space. I'm more
Yeah,
critical.
it's good. We've talked about my naive optimism before, and I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful today, at least, than I was a year ago.
Yeah, well,
And
mine's a smiling cynicism. Everybody thinks I'm happy all the time because I smile a lot, but I'm like, nah, super cynical.
so it'll be interesting to see because these
Mhm.
debates by the EDAs
Yeah,
can become part of the policy platform of the party going forward. So if it's
yeah,
big enough and there's enough grassroots, and there's, like we have the big changes in the recent one was Denmark. We've got
yeah,
France, UK,
yeah,
Finland, Sweden, Norway, every country that's done the systematic evidence review, which is an independent, objective
yeah.
review of the evidence around gender affirming care and interventions for children, have come up with this is a fucking bad idea,
It's a terrible
right?
idea, and the world is watching. I mean, I recently got okay, so two things. One, I heard that the word Tranada, apparently everyone knows this. I just heard it recently, but that's the thing, guys. The world is looking at Canada because it is one of the most captured places, and our prime minister, like I said, has taken it on as a flagship issue, and it is a big deal around the world what goes on here. So, show up to the march, guys, because the world needs us. But the other one I heard some American podcaster debaters call Canada America's evil top hat.
Yeah.
And I thought that that describes it so well. So the world's watching. We really need to.
Who would have thought, 5, 6, 7 years ago that anyone would say that about Canada?
And
You
it's
know,
true.
Trudeau has and the Liberals have destroyed our international reputation. It's unfair to say we're a laughing stock. We're a disgrace,
Well,
and
we're
a
an
real
evil top hat.
yeah, yeah. So let's finish off. We're gonna land the plane here. The big things coming up in September: the Million for Children events
Yeah.
on September 20th. We're inviting people or recommending to people who are concerned about this: keep your kids home from school.
Yes,
That's
please.
the
And
the
if you
baseline thing you can do.
yes, absolutely. And speaking of children, there are some groups who okay, so lots of people have joined in on this. Nobody owns it. I know there's some groups who are saying that they own it and everybody else is fakers, but just have some discretion on that. Some groups are saying you should absolutely bring children, but don't forget queer activism and trans activism is a thing. Look at Faye Johnstone's T-shirt recently said "Protect trans
Yeah,
kids" with a knife on it.
that
She'll
was that
shank
was last
you
night. Yeah,
if you don't comply. So look, these can be violent, and so it is perhaps not the greatest of ideas to take children to these things, even if it's being promoted like some kind of happy festival with sandwiches. Maybe not such a good idea. My personal opinion. You can do as you please, but just be aware of that. So yeah, we recommend absolutely keep children home from school
yeah.
because schools do monitor their
Their
attendance. Right?
attendance.
They
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that the media can pick up on. We can get through freedom of information, the absentee rates. We can talk about it later. It's unlikely that they're going to, unless we get leaks from teachers, that the
Yeah.
school boards are going to report these absences. But we know that in New Brunswick, in the beginning of June, there was huge absences in PEI. I talked to the parents
Well,
group there.
FOIs are a wonderful thing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, also coming up in the fall or September, Posey Parker. Kelly J. Keane announced that her plans have solidified for Canada. I didn't get a date yet, so
No, I
that's
do we even know
that.
where?
Don't know. It might be
I
a
wonder
couple
if
of
it's anything
cities.
to do with the stuff that's being planned in September because I thought that's interesting timing.
It's curious. And Megan Murphy.
Hmm.
This is a great win for my friends in Nanaimo, BC. A Nanaimo mom caught a peeper identifying himself as trans in the Nanaimo Aquatic Center change room in late January, early February. And I talked to her when it happened. And she kindly she kindly escorted this pervert out of the girls' change room because he was trying to peep on her 7-year-old daughter. It's possible he accidentally hit the door on the way out. I don't have all the details, but the police were going to charge her with assault and a hate crime. So she was trying to lawyer up. And then within a couple of weeks, Redux Magazine had they'd identified this guy, illuminated that he was a registered, convicted child sex offender. But the police still won't do anything about it. Okay. So this has created, this mom is fierce. She's an amazing powerhouse of a mama bear. And Megan Murphy is
Yeah.
joining her in Nanaimo in September.
Oh, well done.
Scott, I'll call him Scotty Guy. I won't give away his last name, but Scotty's a longtime LGB activist. He's a
Yeah.
gay man. He's my age. He's in his I'm in my early 50s. He's a couple years younger than me, but was in the gay rights scene in Vancouver decades ago, and has been active in his community for all of the really positive reasons about let's get past our issues with gay and
Yeah.
lesbians, and has made a big contribution over a long time. So Scotty's involved. That's going to be a great event. We know that there's multiple events happening across the country. Peter from Blueprint for Canada is running a great website where he's going to be posting the playbills from all these different events across Canada. It's not just going to be the 20th. A lot of
Yeah, so
people.
all these different organizations. So there's no central planning. I know, like I said, there's one group that would like to pose themselves as the only and central source, but there's lots of different people doing lots of different things that have wanted to do this because it was proposed. Everyone went, this is a fantastic idea, and lots of people are organizing their own events. There's no, like, for example, I work with a bunch of other people, but no one in is the head honcho here kind of determining what's going on. So there's lots of different things going on that you can hop onto. Let's say you're more of a feminist type and you want to join more feminist led movements. There's certainly that.
COSBAR is a great organization for
Yeah.
that. Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's other organizations who might be more religiously focused. So
Yep.
they might be running their own events that are kind of more aimed at that. But the point is that there's a lot of different people who are coming in on this idea, this movement. And I think the 20th is the predominant date, but there's some people doing things around that date too. And so keep an eye out in your social medias. And I'm sure a lot of things are going to be coming out over the coming weeks.
Yeah. Like rapid changes. It's hard to imagine. Just this week, all that stuff that happened is probably more concentrated than any week that I reported on in the spring of this year. This thing is snowballing very, very quickly. What I've learned in the last couple of years of being on this and talking to politicians and former politicians is that politicians aren't leaders.
No,
that they're going to stand up.
We need to be the leaders.
Right. Like we need to show people, we need to show the politicians that this is an issue that people are willing to stand up for and fight for. And when we do that, they will take notice because they recognize that there is a constituency. When was the last time in Canada or in the West where parents were standing up en masse to protest schools? It's I can't fathom it. No. Like we have largely trusted those institutions for decades and decades since the Second World War, and assumed that
there's never been any real reason to have such an issue with teachers,
right. But
what's going on is so corrupt.
If we're getting tens of thousands, let's be real, okay? Tens of thousands, maybe. Will we crack 100,000 people involved? I don't know, but I believe that this is a concern of millions of Canadians. And if we can show the politicians that it is a big concern, they will not only step forward and say, okay, we're going to stand with you, and we're going to speak for you because we want your votes, or we're going to back down from this because the evidence is clear, and now the rising tide of the populists is going to bury us.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that: the more people that actually speak up. Look, there could be consequences. Could happen. It's a possibility. But what are the consequences of not saying anything? Right?
That's right.
They're going to be far, far worse. And so the more of us that actually speak out, whether it's with our friends, with our family, whether it's at work, right?
Yep.
Whether it's anywhere, right? It does not have to be going and making your own podcast. It does not mean suddenly becoming a social media personality or anything like that, although you can. The point is not to be able to, not to fear speaking your mind about how you feel about this, because you might find that the more you speak about it, the more you realize that most people actually agree with you, and there's a very small
That's right.
minority of people that would disagree wholeheartedly, and even smaller amount of people that would be the activists on this issue. And one other thing, don't fear the activists, because one thing I've noticed, first of all, I haven't been attacked because I haven't been targeted, but that's the point. There's such a small number of people that they will find individuals to target and then target those individuals. Now, it's unpleasant for that individual, but if the masses of us that are speaking up, they're not coming after us, right? It is okay to speak up, right? It is okay to say something. I just wanted to put that out there.
I've noticed a huge change in tide in the last 2 years as I've started speaking up about this. It was very intimidating at first.
Yeah.
I kind of a year later, I ran for school trustee. I took a public stand, and I had already been hardened a little bit to the kind of rhetoric and the attacks, and like being called transphobic and a bigot on CTV and CBC and what have you. Like I accepted those consequences,
but
it's getting harder
because there were fewer people. That's the thing. People see that.
Right.
They think everyone who speaks out is going to be treated that way. And the honest truth is that's just not reality.
No, most people I talk to are against this, especially when you explain to them a little bit that, what gender dysphoria is, what the implications of psychological interventions are for kids, what they're doing like medically to children and young people and vulnerable people. It's just we make a move collectively to stand and live in the truth. I borrow that from Václav Havel, the former Czechoslovakian president, before that dissident in behind the Iron Curtain. We just have to stand up and speak the truth and speak it with our community. And there may be bubbles of people, and maybe they have political power for a while, who are living in the lie. But the lie is being exposed for what it is. I'm optimistic about what's coming in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, and maybe it's time to say, like, we'll talk more about this next week. There's going to be lots more happening in the coming 7 days. And I hope viewers have enjoyed this new format of the Canadian Gender Wars Report. We'll keep an eye on what's happening, and we'll share with you, and we'll unpack some of that stuff that is more maybe theoretical and philosophical and what's behind this movement. Last thing I'm going to do, I've been writing under Shannon B. Douglas, and that's a pen name. And I realize now, and in my practice, in my life, my name is Shannon Boucher. Originally, the pen name was to give me a bit of a shield. I don't carry that shield around anymore.
Now.
But I developed a bit of a brand with Shannon B. Douglas. I like it as my pen name for my writing projects, and I'll continue to use it for the Canadian Gender Wars Report. But just to share with everybody,
only the fanciest authors have pen names now. Gives you a bit of cachet.
Well, I'm hoping to see my friend Mia Ashton tonight, who's she wrote for Post Millennial. She was PR for another organization. She's with Michael Schellenberger now at with his big Substack, and I'll have lots